Hey everybody, this is John. I have bought myself a 0805 Dashcam. It used to be called Ojo Cam or any other number assortments of brands. This is not the latest version. The current version is 0806. And rather than showing you the features of the camera, I've actually owned about 3 or 4 of these, one in a car I previously had and a few that I bought for my kids in their car. And having driven with it for a while, I basically want to run straight through the settings and tell you what I think are some of the best settings and some that you don't need to worry about. This is particular to the 0805, which has some more menu options than the original 0803s I bought. So very quickly, resolution, I would recommend you stick with a 16:9 resolution. I think the new Super HDMI is 21:9. Most TVs are 16:9. If you capture something good, something happens to be entertaining and you want to save it, you're going to be compatible at that point with most televisions. Look a couple of years down the line when everybody's getting Super HDMI, it's a different story. But don't be afraid to raise the resolution up on these cameras. They produce very, very good resolution pictures and videos. Set your quality to super fine if it's available, or fine if it's not. You can set this quality both for the video and for the photos. And in reality, memory cards today are so large in capacity and so cheap, it's really not a factor on memory storage or anything like that. There's a mode called AE meter mode. I leave it at the default center. I've never found any really good use for it. The other one is WDR. Just leave that one at the default of on. There's another one that used to be called LDWS, calibration and detection. What it does is when you turn it on and then you go to another screen, it shows you a red and a yellow line, which does some kind of a calibration. I have always found that the default is right on that. And I just recommend that you turn the camera on, plug the USB port into your computer using the mount, by the way. The thing has 2 USB ports. If you connect it onto this side right here, that's physically on the camera, it's going to switch the screen over here and say USB connect, and you have no functionality on the buttons whatsoever. But if you put your mount on and then you wire up the USB port through that mount, the menu is fully functional, and this is the way I like to let it charge up while I'm doing the initial setting of the device. You can actually just point it at something, take a couple of pictures, and look and make sure that the framing looks good, that there's nothing that's blurring or smearing the images. I've never actually had that happen on a camera. So just those 2 settings, I would say look them up. They're now called ADAS instead of LDWS. Change them if you find some reason to change it. The flicker mode I've left on off. The flicker is an attempt to make an adjustment for 50 hertz, 60 hertz. You'll see videos where people are reviewing the cameras talking about, isn't it interesting that traffic light is kind of flickering when I play it back on the camera? And that has to do with the 60 cycle alternating current that's creating a harmonic with the camera recording. That's really just an attempt to match that so you don't get that flickering. And there's some other cases where the actual cycles that are coming out of converters in your car, if you're not using a existing USB connector and you use the one that's provided, there might be some kind of conversion that's going on that's causing an interference and is causing the camera to get that harmonic where everything flashes. I generally leave it off. I'm not worried about flashing traffic lights. It's pretty clear to see that it's a traffic light. It's not hard to mistake. Places like Florida and other states right now are even putting blue lights at the top of the intersection to signal people that this red light you see is actually a traffic light and not something like the top of a radio tower that's off in the distance. So, and the camera is going to reflect that. I've never had a case where it didn't. White balance, I leave it on auto. There's various modes that you can do, and you can change it as you're driving if you want to get a better picture. Sunny, cloudy, one called tungsten, which I haven't figured out unless you're like driving around a bunch of really reflective solid steel buildings. I don't really understand all that. Generally, auto does a very good job of balancing it out. If you're driving for the purpose of photographing the scenery, this might be a time to change it. But for normal driving where you're just trying to record an incident, leave it at auto. There's one called EV that defaults to 0. It can go from -2 to +2. Never had a reason to change it. So I'd look it up and see if it has any value to you. There's a setting called recycle. I consider this to be one of the most critical settings that's on the camera. You set it to off, it will start recording, and it will continue writing the file until it absolutely runs out of space on the SD card. I have found that on the 0803, which I don't remember the high resolution, but it's still about 1920 by 1080, it's really good. This card at 32 gig would record about 2.5 to 3 hours of driving on one file, and it's awesome. The other options are you can say, hey, run for 1 minute and then close that file out, switch to another, or 3 minutes or 5 minutes. Those methods work really good on long trips where you don't care to preserve the scenery. Now, the penalty is, if an incident happens, I hit a deer with mine and caught it on the dash cam. So I pulled the dash cam out of the car. I had one continuous run of video that lasted, I think, like 45 minutes on the file that it was running. So if I take a 45-minute one-way trip and I turn off the engine, I'm going to have a 45-minute recording in that one file. It was pretty easy for me to just open that up and have 45 minutes on the progress bar and say, oh, at this point, I was here. I need to slide it over here to right about here is where the incident happened that I look for. And it's much easier to trace time doing that. If an incident happens and you record individual files, then you're going to say, well, did I have it set for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes? And then you're going to have to make an educated guess. If you start looking at this thing and you've had 2 hours of recording, and you open one up and you're 35 minutes off, you're going to have to, in your head, do a little bit of math saying, well, okay, 5 times 5 is 25, so 5 files out is going to put me 25 minutes away from this 7-minute mark or this 3-minute mark that I was at. It wouldn't be 7 on 5 minutes, but you'll have to do the math in your head and take good guesstimates. Obviously, incidents don't happen that often. So if you don't want to worry about constantly resetting the device, it's good to choose one of these 1, 3, or 5 minutes and just let it run, and it's fire and forget. You're just running, driving, enjoying your time with the company in the car, listening to your tunes, and the device is just running and building a set of files as it goes. If you want to have one long continuous one, then set the continuous one. You can have a real nice long set of scenery recording if you want to do that. But the penalty is, if you do a continuous recording, don't turn the sound off, because at some point that card is going to run out. And if you turn off the sound, you'll miss the audible cue that your card is now full, and you have to manually erase it with a format command in the menu, and then tell the device to start recording again. And if you're doing this for safety, that's a dangerous setting, because it's very easy to get lost and distracted. And then I've even been driving down the road and having conversations with people, and then all of a sudden I'll go, what's that beeping? And it's actually my dash cam trying to tell me that I have completely maxed out that card, and go in there and format it. And it takes me a couple of seconds to think about it. Oh, yeah, if I turn the sound off, I guarantee you I would have never have known. And then if an incident happens, my camera is not recording, and my whole purpose for getting the camera, in my view, has been defeated. So choose that mode wisely. And the 1, 3, 5 minute segment, the other thing that can happen with this is there is a very slight delay that's between, I would say, 1/4 of a second to 1/2 a second, that when it ends one file and it switches to another, you'll notice a physical hiccup if the screen happens to be on. And for that period of time, I don't think the camera's recording. I've reviewed some of the actual files that have come off when it's been in that mode, and there's a very slight missing segment of the driving that is occurring. That's normally not going to be enough where if an incident occurs that you're going to miss a whole lot of stuff. You might see something that you're going to hit, and if the timing is perfect and your device switched files right at the impact, all you're going to do is miss the impact, but you'll see what was coming and the result, and you'll have everything that the dash cam is supposed to record anyway. So that's enough on that one. The next thing is the motion detect. I set that on middle. Motion detect, I don't know if it's fixing the frame or whatever. I've never had a chance to actually test it and see what the other modes are. I would say don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. Auto power off. I set it for 3 minutes. I have found that once you kill the power on these devices, they're charging off of the USB port, but they'll run out of power usually within like 30 seconds to a minute, sometimes less than 30 seconds. So you can set it at 3 minutes, but the odds are by the time you're getting out of the car, you're going to hear the device powering down because it's already exhausted its internal battery. Power off screen. You have 1, 3, 5 minutes where you're looking at the device, you've powered on your car, you're essentially more interested in saying, okay, you're running, you've got power, and you're working. Great. And that's all you want to look at. So you set it at 1 minute, and as you start moving, if you have the motion detector set, which I'll talk about in a minute, then you can hear the audible beep, or you can physically start seeing the light that's on the corner of the LCD. You can actually see it here on the lower right there. And that, when it's blue and not doing anything, indicates that it's in a ready mode. When it's flashing blue or it's switching between blue and red, it's physically reporting. So that's the way you know it's working without having the screen on. I did find that just leaving 1 minute is just to validate operation is enough. If you have a passenger that requires very strange entertainment, set it for 5 or hit a key to bring it back on or whatever you want to do. Let's see. So there's an entry in there called stamp, and I normally leave it to off. It has driver number and date time as an option. And then there's another one called driver number, which is free-form text. I think it gives you up to about 10 or 11 characters that you can put in. The stamp appears to be a concept of supporting a fleet of vehicles. So if I was a company owner and I owned 7 or 8 of these vehicles, then on each one of the dash cams that I put in the camera, I would want to put a unique stamp that would identify what the vehicle was or the driver or whatever I'm doing. The other one, the driver number, is kind of interesting. What I actually find that useful for is if you're willing to take the time to actually set it up, it'll allow you to set alpha or numeric characters in each one of the character positions. It's really good to put your state and then an empty space if you can do it, or a dash, and then your driver's, or not your driver's license, but your car's license plate number in there. And that ties the camera to your car. So in some crazy thing where somebody was trying to use a legal ploy to say, well, that's not really the camera, they grabbed it out of something else, it's actually going to put that number into the recorded information. Keep in mind that this device records video. It also records audio, which you can use the mute button to turn off. Something I recommend if you have passengers in the car. Mute it, because if you have conversations on there, number one, don't give anybody the impression that you're trying to record their conversation and listen to it. That's not a good thing. But generally, even if an incident occurs, the sound isn't going to add that much to it, because normally you can see what happened in the visual capture. That's good enough. Let's see. Yeah, just put your driver number in there and that's good enough. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention is it does have the ability to do a GPS location and from that to derive your speed. That's also written into additional files that are stored on the device unless you explicitly turn them off. So the other setting here is GPS stamp on or off. Do you want your GPS location recorded as text across the screen, physically, that you would see on the LCD and on the replay? If you don't want that, turn it off. The velocity stamp is the same thing. In the background, the files that are recorded with it, there is a file that records your speed that you're doing, but you don't have to display it onto the display. So if you see one that says a velocity stamp, you can turn it off and it'll just be physically on another file on the device. I personally recommend that. You got a speedometer, you don't need it, and I think ultimately recording your speed could work against you if you put this device in a Ferrari. I'm just saying. So, G-sensor sensitive. This device has a really neat little feature. You drive along the road and an impact occurs. If it's a non-minor impact, the G-forces are going to go above a certain level, and the camera has a threshold and says, if I detect a change in G-forces beyond that level, it sets a trigger to record for a specific amount of time, and then it turns the camera off. And this is to prevent a situation where the car is just sitting around, something's happened to the electrical system, and it's staying on, and it's providing the camera power. And you're recording 1, 3, 5 minute, even continuous, but for some reason the camera doesn't turn off. You're running the risk that you could overwrite the evidence that you recorded of the incident. So the G setting, don't set it too high, It's like unless you're like flying straight into a tree, then it will turn it off. You want to do something where even if you slam on the brakes really hard because you're trying to avoid a collision, you want that to trigger the camera. So if you want to test it, go to a safe abandoned parking lot in the middle of the night and do it there, but be reasonable on how you test it. But the 2.5G setting seems to be about right. That's just my recommendation. The other setting after that is GPS on or off. The GPS on or off is different than the GPS stamp. The GPS says you want the GPS information recorded. You can record what you're doing with just audio and video and put no location information on it. That's how you do it. The last one is the speed unit, or next to last is the speed unit, displayed in miles per hour, kilometers. Again, you have to turn the velocity stamp on for that to have any meaning. And the last one is the beep setup, on and off. This device is really good at beeping when it needs attention. It's really awful when you're working in the menu and every single thing you're pressing is as loud as every alert beep that it has. It's a trade-off. I say leave it on. The sound is useful, especially if you get distracted, to just point your attention to the device and say, look, I need attention. Maybe you need to format me because I filled the disk up. Maybe for some reason you hit a really nasty pothole and it went over its threshold and stopped the recording, and you just want to know that. The last 4 settings on the back side are language, default setting, which is essentially a master oops button, if you will, set it back to factory defaults. The format, which you'll use when you have the SDHC card in there so that you can set it up and you can wipe out whatever's on the card so it starts over. Very useful, and I use it very often. And the software version, which is just going to help for troubleshooting. One thing I will recommend to you, you'll see a lot of people saying these cards can carry 128 gig in the HD cards. And it's fantastic. 128 gig in my old camera would have recorded, on the 0803, would have literally recorded a 12-hour one-way trip on one card. These cameras with a little high resolution, they'll chew up a little bit more. But what I recommend that you do is don't buy one 128 card or 164 gig card. Get like 2 16s, 2 8s, 2 32s, whatever size you want for the purpose. But use the bigger cards if you really just want to record it to archive it like in your photo library for entertainment. Get 2 cards because if an incident occurs and your car is still drivable, what you want to do is take a couple of minutes, pull that card out of the unit and replace it with a fresh card so that you can still record your additional driving and you're still providing yourself your protection. But your other one you're going to save and hold until whatever incident happened is resolved legally. So in case somebody says, well, you didn't do this, you're going to keep your original thing. You don't want to, after an incident, have the same card in there and run the risk of losing everything. That's a very bad thing. So any other capabilities of the camera you would like, there's plenty of videos that already exist on YouTube. Please help yourself out. I hope this experience is helping you to at least go through the setup menu and understand a little bit better what you're doing with it. Thanks.